You playing Minecraft. I like your cut, G.
Hello, so today I'm talking about whether or not I think the next Half-Life game will be in VR, which I'm expecting to be Half-Life 3, or potentially another game like Alyx, which is not really numbered. Either way, if it takes place after the ending of Alyx, I'm going to be considering it Half-Life 2 Episode 3, or basically Half-Life 3, okay. So I've been thinking about this a lot, and the short answer is basically yes, I do think that it will definitely be in VR. The long answer is that the next Half-Life game would not really work any other way, so let me explain. The first and main reason is that the Half-Life games have always been used to innovate and push the boundaries of gaming forward. Half-Life 1 released all the way back in 1998, well over 20 years ago, and at the time it was a huge standout in an era of Doom clones and whatnot. Half-Life, in my opinion, was one of the first big narrative-driven, story-focused, first-person shooters, which really kickstarted the genre and pushed the industry forward as a whole. Like I said prior to all of this, the games were focused on just shooting and mindless action, such as Wolfenstein, Doom, Duke Nukem, and so on. Games like these really had no real deep or complex narratives, which is why Half-Life 1 was such a huge standout at the time of its release, and basically the main reason Valve exploded in popularity after its release. Half-Life 2 was, I think, more about pushing the technical aspects of gaming forward as well as expanding the narrative from the previous game. This is because 1, it was built on the new Source engine, which had insane physics, lighting, textures, and just overall graphics compared to other games at the time. Even the animations on G-Man were previously unseen, as they looked very realistic for the time and even still hold up very well to this day. By expanding on the previous game, taking what was good and improving it, and taking what was bad and fixing it, Valve really outdid themselves with the release of Half-Life 2, and it was worth the wait. It's arguably one of the best and most important games of all time, and served as a huge milestone in gaming history. The next mainline release were, of course, the episodes, which was Valve's attempt at making episodic content in an attempt to release more Half-Life content on a smaller scale, which was better for consumers as it meant not such a big gap in time between releases, and it was better for Valve because it meant not such huge projects taking on at one time. As we know, they only managed up to episode 2 with that insane cliffhanger ending, which Alyx finally addressed after all this time. So we've established that each Half-Life release was used to innovate something, whether it's story, gameplay, physics, animation, episodic content, the introduction of DLC, or anything else. They've always been used to push something forward. This is why something like Alyx is an absolutely perfect fit with VR. VR is a new and emerging technology and will only go up from here. However, since the start of mainstream adoption a couple of years ago, there have been 3 main issues with VR. The first is that 1, it's expensive, 2, there's a lack of AAA high quality polished titles, and 3, the adoption rates. Valve doesn't really help with the first point as they have one of the most expensive headsets on the market, but they definitely helped with the adoption rate, as Alyx is definitely the most polished VR game out there, and I would say the best VR game released to date, and even one of the best games released in general ever. I might be wrong, but I heard somewhere that 1 million new people were introduced into VR through Half-Life Alyx. On top of this, in an interview with Robin Walker, who worked on Alyx, he said that the people at Valve would like to think of Alyx as the return to the Half-Life franchise, and not the end of it, hopefully hinting at more games in the future. As we also know through Valve News Network, who's known now as Tyler McVicker, they're working on at least one other game which is called Citadel, which is set in the Half-Life universe. However, this is a separate multiplayer project, so I'll leave a link to that in the link below. Alyx pushes VR forward as it's a new medium for interactive entertainment that gives an experience and level of immersion that you simply cannot get in other forms of entertainment, and even more so in gaming. Like 2 Clicks Phillips said in his review, Alyx is basically the Half-Life 1 of VR, so the next VR Half-Life game would be the equivalent of Half-Life 2 but for VR. Valve would take everything good about Alyx, expand on it, fix some of the issues with Alyx, and introduce new features and mechanics not previously seen in any VR game. This is just what they do, they push things forward. For them to go back to flat screen for the next Half-Life would be taking a massive step backwards, as this goes against the whole philosophy and point of Half-Life games. I'm paraphrasing, but Gabe said in an interview that they don't just crank out Half-Life games to make the quarterly numbers. They make them in their own time when they want to, but when they do release, it's always worth the wait. And yes, even Alyx is worth a 13-year wait, at least it was for me. The next game will push VR forward in the same way that Half-Life 2 did, and I think it may even be released around the same time as their next headset, whenever that is. Regardless, it would not make any logical sense for Valve to go back to flat screen when they have made such a huge commitment to VR. On top of this, they have expressed a huge amount of interest in VR and even things like brain-computer interfacing and so on. The final reason is that the Half-Life games go hand in hand with VR due to the interactive nature of both VR and Half-Life games. When you're playing VR, you have to move physically, grab things, pick up things, manually reload, rather than pushing simple buttons. This seems like such a natural progression from the previous titles. Even the cutscenes in older Half-Life games were in first person, as to not take control away from the player. They were always completely immersed and in first person. You're always interacting with the environment in older titles, picking up objects and so on, and VR makes all of these things 10 times better. The control is never taken away from you either. Even in Half-Life Half-Life 2, part of the E3 tech demo reveal was just about the interactivity between the player and surrounding environments. Look at this footage. From the very beginning, the core aspect of Half-Life games have always been about interactivity, and there's not a medium more perfect of a fit for interactivity than VR. This is why I say it really does feel like a natural progression for the Half-Life games to transition into VR exclusives, as it really couldn't happen in any other way or in any other medium. I've heard some people say that they think the next Half-Life game will be compatible with both VR and 2D play. They are doing this in Citadel, which is a new Half-Life game in development, but as far as I know, that's a separate multiplayer project and not a continuation of Alyx. For the next Alyx type game, this is not possible because of how different flat screen games are in comparison to VR. For a start, the button inputs and controls are completely the opposite, where 2D relies on direct button inputs, precise movements with mouse and keyboards, and generally higher difficulty levels. VR relies on real-time gestures, hand movements, fewer button inputs, and the difficulty is generally easier across games to account for the human error that naturally happens when playing VR, such as manually reloading in the middle of a tense combat situation. It wouldn't really be possible to make a game that accommodates both modes of play, as both experiences would be so different. It would almost be like you're playing a completely different game, which is basically what the Source 2 mod for Alyx was, which we saw before. It has to be either flat or VR, it cannot be both, as it just won't work, unless it's something like Citadel. Again, if you want to know about that, just look at the video that's in the description, made by Valve's News Network or Tyler McVicker. In conclusion, I'm sorry if this video seemed kind of rambly, because it was. It would not make any sense for Valve to take one step forward but two steps backwards by releasing another Half-Life game, but making it flat screen. They would need to improve on Alyx, make it much better, and release it for VR in order to push this technology forward and help with the adoption rates. I'm 99% sure that with the success of Alyx and the really good reviews that it received, Half-Life 3 is finally on the way. Maybe there will be spin-offs before then, and maybe we'll not get it soon. Maybe it will take another few years for it to release, or maybe even 13. As always, Valve time is Valve time, but when Half-Life 3 does release, it will be one of the best games ever made, and definitely worth the wait.
Time, Dr. Freeman? Is it really that time?